What happens when a person is officially erased? Not by death, but by a quiet decision. This is the story of a name that disappeared from the records, and the silence that followed. It all began during a time of strict control, where your entire identity was defined by documents. Without the right paperwork, you simply had no place in the world. The individual at the center of this story lived an ordinary life, filled with work, family, and simple routines. They weren't a public figure, and had no reason to attract any special attention from the authorities. But the government systems in place were rigid and highly centralized. Paperwork often mattered more than people. Mistakes were rarely fixed, and authority was almost never questioned. It started with a small, seemingly insignificant conflict, a minor disagreement with some officials. Nothing appeared serious at first, just a bureaucratic inconvenience. But soon, strange delays started happening. Files would go missing. Applications would sit unanswered. Access to basic information became restricted, as if a door was slowly being closed. The person tried to resolve the issue. They made countless visits to government offices, calmly requesting explanations. The responses they received were always unclear, always vague. Each office pointed a finger at another department, and no one would accept responsibility. The instructions they were given were contradictory, and a quiet frustration began to build. Before long, accessing basic services became nearly impossible. Employment verifications would fail, housing applications were denied, the very foundation of their identity started to feel unstable, like shifting sand. Their family was confused, assuming it was all just a temporary glitch, a simple administrative error that would soon be sorted out. They still had trust in the system, and they held on to hope. Then, slowly, the devastating truth began to surface. The name no longer appeared in any official records. There was no explanation, no notification, just a void where a life used to be. Their existence had been quietly erased. They carefully filed appeals, resubmitted all their documents, and offered every possible proof of identity, but nothing changed. The silence was deafening. The system didn't deny them directly, it simply didn't respond. This complete lack of an answer was worse than a rejection. Silence became the final resolution, and time turned into an insurmountable obstacle. Daily life became a maze of restrictions. Simple movement required special permission. Every right they once had depended on recognition, and that recognition no longer existed. The emotional weight grew heavier with each passing day. Confusion turned into fear, and fear gave way to a profound sense of isolation. Their identity, something they had always taken for granted, now felt impossibly fragile, like a piece of glass about to shatter. It became clear this wasn't an accident. It was a glimpse into a much larger structure, one where absolute control was maintained through the power of erasure, and where correcting such an error was nearly impossible. The person stood at a breaking point. Without official records, they had no voice. Without a voice, they had no defense. The next phase of their struggle would not just be about getting their name back, it would be about survival itself. What do you do when the world is told you don't exist? The official erasure marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. Life off the grid was not a choice but a necessity. The first challenge was financial. Without a bank account or a recognized identity, earning a living was incredibly difficult. The person turned to the informal economy, working odd jobs for cash, relying on a network of trusted individuals who knew their story. Every transaction was a risk, every interaction a potential point of exposure. Housing was another major hurdle. Renting an apartment or owning a home was out of the question. They had to rely on the generosity of friends and distant relatives, moving from place to place to avoid drawing attention. This constant movement created a sense of rootlessness, a feeling of being a permanent guest in someone else's life. The simple comfort of having a place to call home was gone. Social connections became a lifeline, but also a source of constant anxiety. While some friends and family members offered unwavering support, others grew distant, either out of fear or because they simply couldn't comprehend the situation. The person had to become a master of discretion, carefully choosing who to trust. Every new relationship was a gamble. How do you explain to someone that, according to the government, you don't exist? The psychological toll was immense. The feeling of being invisible was a heavy burden. There was a constant low-level paranoia, a fear that any interaction with an official event, a routine traffic stop, could lead to disastrous consequences. They were living in the shadows of a society they were once a part of. The world moved on, but they were stuck in a state of suspended animation. Despite the hardships, this new existence also brought unexpected discoveries. Without the constraints of official identity, the person began to see the world differently. They found a community of others living on the fringes. People who had been forgotten or cast aside by the system for various reasons. In this hidden world, trust and mutual support were the currency. A person's worth was not defined by a document, but by their actions and their character. They learned to be resourceful in ways they never imagined. They became skilled at navigating informal networks and finding solutions outside of official channels. It was a life of constant adaptation, but it was also a life of profound human connection. The bonds they formed in this shadow world were stronger and more genuine than many they had known before. Years passed. The person's physical appearance changed. They adopted a new name, a new persona, not for deception, but for survival. Their old identity became a ghost, a story they rarely told. The quiet anger they once felt had transformed into a resilient determination. They were no longer fighting the system head-on. They were learning to exist alongside it, invisible yet present. But the ghosts of their past never fully disappeared. There were moments, a glimpse of an old photograph, a song from their previous life that brought a wave of sadness and longing. The desire for justice, for their name to be restored, never completely faded. It was a quiet ember that continued to glow in the dark. This story is not just about one person's struggle against a faceless bureaucracy. It's a powerful reminder of how fragile our modern identities can be. We place so much trust in systems, in databases, in pieces of paper. We assume they are infallible. But what happens when those systems fail, or worse, when they are used as a tool of control? The individual's journey into the shadows reveals a hidden truth about our society, that for some, existence is a privilege, not a right. It forces us to question the nature of identity itself. Is it something granted to us by an authority, or is it something we build through our relationships, our actions, and our resilience? This story doesn't have a neat and tidy ending. The name was never officially restored. The system never acknowledged its mistake. But in a way, the person found a different kind of victory. They survived. They built a new life, a new identity, on their own terms. They proved that a human spirit is more resilient than any file, and that a life can have meaning, even when it's erased from the official record. Their legacy is a cautionary tale. It warns us about the dangers of unchecked power and the dehumanizing nature of bureaucracy. But it's also a story of hope, a testament to the incredible strength of the human will to endure, to connect, and to find a place in the world. Even when the world tries to pretend you're not there. Imagine one day you wake up and discover you don't exist. Not in the real world, of course. You're still breathing, thinking, feeling. But on paper, in the countless databases that define modern life, your name is gone. This isn't a dystopian novel. It's the terrifying reality for some, a silent battle against an invisible, all-powerful system. Today, we're diving into one such story, a journey into the heart of bureaucratic erasure. It all started with a simple, routine transaction. A document renewal, something most of us do without a second thought. But the system returned an error, record not found. Annoying, but probably just a glitch, right? That's what they thought too. So, the journey began, a trip to the local records office. Then another, and another. Each visit was a masterclass in deflection. One official would blame a recent software update, a classic technical error. Another would suggest, with a sympathetic but unhelpful smile, that the best course of action was to start the entire registration process from scratch, as if they were a newborn. Responsibilities was a hot potato, passed from desk to desk, department to department, until it vanished into thin air. No one was at fault, yet nothing was right. Frustration grew, but they were determined. If verbal requests were being ignored, then written ones, formal and undeniable, would surely work. They meticulously gathered every piece of identification they had ever owned. Birth certificate, old passports, school records, letters a lifetime of proof. These were carefully copied, certified, and attached to formal requests for correction. The letters were sent by registered mail, demanding a response, an explanation, anything. But the mailbox remained empty. The emails went unanswered. Silence was the only reply, a deafening void where acknowledgement should have been. It felt like shouting into a black hole. And as the official silence deepened, the real-world consequences began to ripple outward, turning a bureaucratic headache into a full-blown crisis. Life as they knew it started to shrink. The first major blow came at the bank. A simple withdrawal was denied. The system couldn't verify their identity. Suddenly, their own money was out of reach, held hostage by a database error. Then came travel. A planned trip had to be canceled because they couldn't get the necessary permissions. The world, which had once felt open and accessible, was now closing in, its borders defined by digital walls they couldn't scale. Every closed door was a reminder of their disappearing freedom, a freedom they had always taken for granted. Next, their professional life collapsed. Job hunting became a humiliating exercise in futility. An exciting opportunity would arise, interviews would go brilliantly, and then came the background check. We're sorry, we couldn't verify your details. The phrase became a recurring nightmare. Employers, understandably wary, would retract their offers. How could you hire a ghost? Their career, built over years of hard work and dedication, evaporated. Income became a source of constant gnawing anxiety. The stability they had worked so hard to achieve was gone, replaced by uncertainty and a growing sense of panic. The social fallout was slower, more insidious, but just as devastating. At first, friends were supportive, offering advice and words of encouragement. But as weeks turned into months, their story began to sound unbelievable. "Are you sure you went to the right office? Did you try calling this number?" The questions were well-intentioned, but they subtly shifted the blame. It became easier to just say everything's fine than to explain the soul-crushing loop of failure. Invitations started to dry up. The phone rang less often. The feeling of being a burden, of being a problem that no one could solve, led to a self-imposed isolation. Embarrassment replaced comfort, and silence replaced conversation. They were alone, trapped in a nightmare no one else could see. Family, bless them, tried to intervene. Parents, siblings, they made calls, visited offices, used their own officially recognized names as leverage. They'd get a little further, a brief flicker of hope, but would ultimately hit the same invisible wall. "We can't discuss another person's case," the officials would say, a shield of privacy used to enforce erasure. This created a strange and painful dynamic. Seeing how easily their family members could navigate the very systems that had expelled them felt like a cruel joke. The gap between their validated existence and their own negated one was a constant, painful reminder of what they had lost. Desperate, they turned to the law. Surely, the justice system could cut through this red tape. They found a lawyer who listened, who understood the gravity of the situation. But the legal path was paved with obstacles. Without an official identity, filing a case was a challenge in itself. The process was agonizingly slow and astronomically expensive. This was the core of the paradox, the cruel logic of the trap. To restore their identity, the system required proof. But to get that proof, the system first had to recognize them. It was an impossible loop, a bureaucratic Mobius strip, with no beginning and no end. Every form they filled out was a dead end. Every appeal they filed was quietly closed for lack of new information. Deadlines would pass, their window of opportunity shrinking with each one. Hope, once a driving force, began to flicker and fade, worn down by the sheer weight of institutional indifference. Progress wasn't just slow, it felt structurally impossible. The mental toll was immense. Each day was a battle with anxiety. Every phone call, every trip to an official building, was accompanied by a knot of dread in their stomach. Sleep offered little escape, often filled with restless dreams of being lost or invisible. Their confidence, once a core part of their personality, was eroded, replaced by a pervasive sense of helplessness. They began to question their own reality. It's a strange feeling, to be physically present but systemically absent, to be seen by people on the street, but to be invisible to the structures that govern society. Their very existence started to feel conditional, fragile, and not entirely their own. Yet even in the depths of exhaustion and despair, a spark of defiance remained. Giving up was not an option. To surrender meant accepting erasure, to agree that they didn't matter, and that was unthinkable. This fight was no longer just about a bank account or a job. It was about the fundamental right to be recognized, to have a name, to exist. The struggle revealed a terrifying form of modern control. No physical force was used, no overt threats were made. It was a silent, clean, and devastatingly effective way to restrict a life, to sideline a person without ever laying a hand on them. As more time passed, a sense of finality began to creep in. It felt like the end of a long, grueling chapter. The next phase, whatever it was, would be decisive. Either they would break through the wall and reclaim their name, or the erasure would become permanent. The last embers of their official identity extinguished forever. Everything hinged on what came next. The silent battle was reaching its climax. Imagine waking up one day to find that, according to the official records, you no longer exist. This isn't a plot from a science fiction movie. It's a chilling reality that can happen when a name is quietly removed from the books. Today, we're diving into a story from the shadows, a tale of bureaucratic erasure and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's a story about what happens when the systems designed to serve us fail us in the most profound way. It all started with silence. The final response arrived, but it wasn't a response at all. There was no explanation, no acknowledgement of a mistake, and certainly no apology. Just a void where an answer should have been. And in that void, a decision was made. A person, a life, was effectively erased from the official ledger of society. From that day forward, life became a series of insurmountable walls. Imagine trying to open a bank account, see a doctor, or even just travel freely, but at every turn, you're met with a digital dead end. Your name, your identity, returns a not found error. Access to essential services, things we all take for granted, was completely blocked. Simple movement, like crossing a border or even just verifying your identity for a job, became a constant, exhausting negotiation. The normal routines of life. They became impossible. Every day was a reminder that in the eyes of the system, you were a ghost. But this is where the story turns. When institutions fail, community rises. The person learned to navigate this new, limited world by relying on the informal networks of human connection. Fronts helped quietly, finding ways around the rigid blockades. Family became the anchor, providing stability and support where the state had withdrawn it. The local community, in its own way, stepped in to replace the faceless institutions. It was a powerful testament to the fact that our true identity is just a number in a database. It's woven into the relationships we build and the people who know us. Internally, a profound shift occurred. When your worth is no longer validated by a piece of paper or a digital file, you're forced to find it within yourself. Identity became an internal fortress, built on self-knowledge and personal conviction, not external recognition. Dignity survived, not because it was granted by an authority, but because it was an inherent part of being human. Resilience, born from necessity, filled the gaping void left by the system's failure. It was a quiet, personal victory against an invisible, all-powerful opponent. But internal strength doesn't pay the bills or restore your rights. So, the fight continued. The attempts to restore the records never stopped. It became a routine of its own. Letters were written and sent, again and again, into the bureaucratic abyss. Meetings were requested, repeatedly, often with no response. Persistence became a form of existence, a daily act of defiance against being forgotten. Behind closed doors, there were glimmers of humanity. Some officials, trapped within the same rigid system, showed quiet sympathy, a knowing look, a hushed word of advice. But these small gestures couldn't change the outcome. The authority at the top remained unyielding. The processes stayed as rigid and inflexible as ever. It was a clear, frustrating lesson. Power, when it makes a mistake, will often choose silence over accountability. It will avoid responsibility at all costs, even when a human life hangs in the balance. Years crawled by. The initial shock and frantic struggle slowly settled into a long, drawn-out reality. The absence from the records became a permanent feature of life. The hope of a quick fix faded, replaced by a grim acceptance. But being erased from a file doesn't erase you from the world. Memory took the place of documentation. History, his story, her story, lived on through the people who witnessed it, through the family and friends who refused to let them be forgotten. The narrative of a life was no longer held in government files, but in the hearts and minds of a community. This experience, as tragic as it is, reveals a larger, more unsettling truth about the world we live in. It shows us that systems can erase people without a single act of physical violence. Control can be exerted through clicks of a mouse and bureaucratic silence. Power doesn't always need to use force. Sometimes, the most potent weapon it has is inaction. The refusal to see, to acknowledge, to correct that silence can be more powerful and more damaging than any overt act of oppression. So, why does this story matter, especially if it happened in the past, in the shadows? It matters because our identity, our very personhood, should never depend on the convenience of a bureaucracy. Records are created to serve people, to facilitate life, not to control or erase it. When these systems fail, the harm they cause spreads quietly, invisibly, poisoning lives one by one. And where there is harm, there must be accountability. We have to demand it. Remembering stories like this is our shield. It's how we protect others from suffering the same fate. It's a way to challenge unchecked authority and to question the systems we place our trust in. It's a demand for more humane, more responsive, and more accountable institutions. By remembering the forgotten, we restore not only their dignity, but our own shared humanity. If this story made you pause, if it made you think, then please, don't let it fade away. Keep it alive. Share it, especially in places where silence reigns and difficult truths are ignored. Be the voice for those who have been made invisible. Support the people in your own communities who are struggling against faceless systems. Because awareness is the first step toward prevention. We learn from the past not just to remember it, but to ensure it is never, ever repeated. Thank you for listening to this story from the shadows. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more stories that challenge our world and inspire change. Your attention is the light that pushes the shadows back. Thanks for watching.